Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Claims that proper warnings could have prevented many deaths in Libya's devastating floods as the number of people killed passes 11,000. As hopes fade of finding survivors from the earthquake in Morocco, some remote communities are still waiting for help. Strengthening relations. DPRK leader Kim Jong-un tours Russia's largest aircraft factory on the fourth day of his visit. And stalled talks on a new contract drive 12,000 workers to go on strike at the United States' three biggest car makers. The death toll from the floods in Libya's coastal city of Derna has soared to 11,300, according to the Red Crescent. At least 10,000 other people are still thought to be missing. Search efforts are continuing, with aid teams battling to help survivors after two dams burst on Sunday. The UN says many deaths could have been avoided if proper warnings had been issued. The World Health Organization has called on authorities in Libya to stop burying victims in mass graves. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Ahmed Abbar, who is in Tripoli. So, Ahmed, what's the latest on the situation in Derna?
The latest situation in Derna is quite promising due to the ability of saving hundreds of survivors. To be honest, the gratitude to the local brave authorities on the ground and the international technical rescue teams who has the experience and the specialized equipment. The Spanish team, the Italian and the Turkish team, they've done a remarkable job. This is quite promising indicators that there's hope to save more and more if we reach in the right time. So far, the death toll is a bit increasing. The east side of Derna was connected just a couple of hours ago, which means there's medical supplies, basic food items have been delivered to the east side of Derna. However, the ongoing rescue operation didn't stop during day and night. Each couple of hours, we hear that a few citizens were saved, which indicates that the rescue activities should continue and should carry on to save as many lives as we can. In the meantime, there's some also other efforts in terms of recovering bodies. Algeria team, alongside with local rescue teams, they are trying to dive into the sea, trying to identify any possible bodies to be recovered. In the meantime, the local authorities advised all the citizens to go to the specialized locations in the east to give samples of DNA, which will help into identifying the missing bodies or the recovered bodies, to identify their identities. Everybody is trying to do their best. Everybody trying to play his own role. However, the disaster and the consequences remain stronger and way much bigger than the capacity that we have now.
So the search and rescue effort continues then, but growing concerns now that the poor condition of those dams above Derna played a role in this disaster.
Yes, this is true. These two dams, they didn't have any rehabilitation for the past 20 years. The poor condition of these two dams helped and contributed directly to this disaster. Also due to the geography of Derna, because there's a valley, it splits the city into two sides. However, all of this responsibility and accountability, it should be on the burden, it should be on the shoulders of the authorities in the east side. The general attorney arrived there yesterday and started his investigation. However, the number one priority that we should face now and we should be focusing on, which is how to save as many lives as we can and how to recover bodies and provide the mental, the psychological, the materialistic support for those who are affected by these torrents and floods, and with huge solidarity that we can see among all of the Libyans. They are unifying themselves, their efforts, their volunteer works towards such a crisis. The accountability will be chased and will be demanded by the Libyan people for this disaster. However, in these couple of days, we need only to focus how to respond to such an emergency and how to organize our effort, the international support efforts, in order to do the right thing and reach people in the right time, the right place. But the Libyan people, they wouldn't forget about this disaster. We will share the sorrow and the sadness of all those who suffered from loss in their relatives and their families, and we will ask and we will demand for accountability for those officials who were mainly responsible for such disaster, for poor judgment and poor mismanagement that have contributed to this disaster to give such exponential consequences and negative impacts.
Ahmed Abbar in Tripoli, thank you very much. A week after the devastating earthquake in Morocco, survivors in some remote communities are still waiting for help. Rescuers are trying to reach mountain villages cut off by the quake. There are reports of donkeys having to be used to transport vital supplies. Well, let's talk to our correspondent in Morocco, Ken Brown. So, Ken, you're in the Atlas Mountains. What's it like there now? How bad is the damage?
Yes, Robin, we're here in the village of Talat Yaqub in the Atlas Mountains, high up here, right where the epicenter of this earthquake struck. And we're seeing scenes of utter devastation. You can see some of it here behind me. We're seeing entire villages razed. We're seeing thousands of tents, yellow civil protection tents set up in many villages along the roads here. We're talking now about almost 3,000 people who have officially lost their lives in this earthquake. Some 600 villages have been affected, many of them along this road, the National Road number 7. We're talking about 300,000 people affected overall by this terrible tragedy. Now, we've been talking to some search and rescue teams here, and there is some pretty sad news. Basically, the way that the construction works here in Morocco, many of these villages, the houses are built with stones, with mud, with clay, very rudimentary type dwellings, and they essentially fall in, leaving very little survival space for people to survive under those conditions. A lot of the rescue operations have now become more recovery missions.
So what's the government been saying about the kind of help it's going to provide?
Yes, of course, already we're looking at some type of recovery here. Billions and billions of dollars worth of damage has been done, huge infrastructure challenges. We just spoke to a member of the Ministry of Infrastructure who said that is the biggest challenge, the financial challenge, trying to get the resources to where they're needed, trying to get the roads open, to get to the villages that are still cut off. As you mentioned earlier, people hiking, climbing, going up on donkeys to some of those villages to try and bring some relief. Most of the rescue efforts, we've been talking to many villagers who said that the rescue efforts were done by them, that they had to dig their loved ones, their family members, both alive and dead, from the rubble with their own hands. Now, we have seen some numbers today announced by the Moroccan government. The government met with King Mohammed VI, and they said that the families affected by this earthquake will receive a payment of around $250 a month. They're talking about $14,000 for for families whose homes have been entirely destroyed, $8,000 grants for families whose homes have been damaged and need to be practically rebuilt. But the scale of the mission, the recovery and the rebuild is just difficult to understand. It's difficult to get your head around at the moment, Robin.
Ken, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Ken Brown, in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. Meanwhile, efforts to get more relief supplies to earthquake victims continue. Our correspondent, Adnan Chawachi, has visited a warehouse in Marrakesh, where volunteers are coordinating aid shipments to affected areas.
These young men have come from remote regions in southern Morocco. Their convoy traveled some 800 kilometers in 12 hours to reach this warehouse in Marrakesh, which is collecting aid for the affected communities. The shipments include contributions from different provinces in the North African country.
His Majesty, King Mohammed VI, may Allah assist him, chaired a ministerial meeting and ordered the creation of a special fund to receive contribution of citizens as well as private and public institutions who have rushed to help. We have all answered the call, collected donations from all Moroccans in our region.
Everyone in our region in the south of Morocco is involved in this wave of solidarity. We have collected tons of donations to help those affected by the earthquake. Over 80 trucks were loaded rapidly.
Hundreds of trucks and vans loaded with food, water and all necessities have entered this facility in the suburbs of the city of Marrakesh. This large-scale operation aims to meet the daily needs of the population in the affected areas.
King Mohammed VI ordered the full mobilization of the Mohammed V Foundation for Solidarity with all its components to support citizens in the affected areas. This organization is very active on the ground, providing logistical and technical assistance in the aftermath of the earthquake.
The foundation will distribute aid to the impacted zones in a rapid and efficient manner without blocking or slowing down rescue operations. That's why many central warehouses were created, especially in regions with the highest rates of victims and injured.
Khadim Allah Harbul is a civil society activist from the city of Bujdor. She says all women in this distant region are involved in this national effort to support the victims.
Tents and medicines are much needed in the northern regions, which were hit by the earthquake. We came all the way from the south to help our brothers and sisters. All Moroccans were affected by this disaster.
The Royal Armed Forces are playing an active role in the aid collection and distribution effort. King Mohammed VI has made a personal donation of around $100 million to the Special Relief Fund for the victims of the earthquake. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Marrakesh.
Leaders from 135 nations are meeting in Cuba to discuss challenges faced by developing countries. The G77 plus China summit is taking place in the capital, Havana, with the head of China's anti-graft watchdog, Li Xi, representing Beijing. The G77 is a group of developing countries in Asia, Africa, Central and South America, established in 1964. Well, Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther is in Havana. So, Philip, what's being talked about at the summit?
Oh, look, this, according to the organizers here, according to the Cuban government, is about development, officially about the role of science, innovation and technology, but it's also about giving this huge group a bigger and a more coordinated role in international negotiations. And it is an absolutely enormous group. 134 countries are members of the G77 plus China, despite its name. They are not all represented here at the highest level, though Brazilian President Lula is here, for example, the presidents of Argentina, Colombia and South Africa as well. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is here in Havana, and the opening statements have already been given by the Cuban president, but also the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is here in Havana for this summit. There's going to be a concluding statement here in Havana tomorrow, and we've already seen the draft text. It calls for a new economic world order on behalf of this group, the G77 plus China. And again, to give you an idea of just how big this group is, it's 2/3 of UN member countries. It represents 80% of the world population.
So, Philip, what role is China playing at the G77 meeting?
Well, look, it's in the name, G77 plus China. China is not officially a member, but it has been part of this group, if you will, for the last 2 decades. Essentially, what China does with this group, and has done over the last 2 decades, is give it bigger bargaining power on the world stage, first of all. For example, as we've seen over the last few years, particularly in negotiations on climate change, at the climate change summits, for example, that happen every year. That's when China and this group of 77 do their negotiations together. Also, of course, This is about investment, market opportunities. There are plenty for China with the whole of Africa, the whole of South America represented here, especially when it comes to science and technology. China believes that it has a very important role to play. China also is edging closer and closer to the global south and to what you could see as a polarized world essentially right now. The G7 representing North America and Europe, and then this huge group, well, representing the South, essentially. For Cuba, by the way, already a big success to get all of these countries together in this country at a time, by the way, of a very serious economic crisis here in Cuba.
Philip, thank you very much. Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther in Havana. China is to sanction 2 US defense firms for providing arms to Taiwan. The Chinese Foreign Ministry called recent deals involving Northrop Grumman and a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin dangerous, saying they violated national safety and sovereign interests. Beijing urged the United States to abide by the One China principle. The UK, France and Germany will not lift sanctions on Iran, despite it being part of a timetable set out in the 2015 nuclear deal. The three say it's an attempt to deter Tehran from selling drones and missiles to Russia. Under the deal, some sanctions were due to end next month, but Iran has been accused of breaching the agreement by enriching and storing uranium. Tehran called the decision illegal and provocative. The US Senate Armed Services Committee is investigating SpaceX owner Elon Musk over his alleged decision to not activate the Starlink satellite network over Crimea. The claim was made in a biography, saying that Musk disabled Starlink access close to the Crimean coast to prevent a Ukrainian attack. Musk says Starlink was not active in those areas because of American sanctions on Russia. The DPRK leader, Kim Jong-un, has toured a Russian fighter jet factory on the 4th day of his visit to the country. It's Russia's largest aviation plant. Well, our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow. So, Dasha, another tour of Russia's military facilities. What's happened today?
Well, that's right. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has traveled to Komsomolsk-on-Amur, and he has visited the aviation factory, which produces some of the most sophisticated aircraft of the Russian Defense Ministry, Su-35 and Su-57 fighter jets. Denis Manturov, Russia's deputy prime minister, was accompanying him on this guided tour of the factory, and he has said that he sees really good prospects of the cooperation between the DPRK and Russia in the area of aircraft construction. He also said that regarding the other areas where the sides could cooperate. At the same time, he said that was particularly important for these two countries to achieve what he described as the sovereignty in the technological sphere. We also have heard that the trip of Kim Jong-un will continue. He will be going to Vladivostok, where he is expected to see Russia's Pacific Fleet. And certainly the Kremlin has been making several comments following the visit of North Korean leader to Komsomolsk-on-Amur and the negotiations that the Russian President Vladimir Putin had with Kim. Moscow says clearly that there is no sensation in this summit in Russia. It is a tradition, adding that the two countries are not creating threats to anyone. We also have heard the Kremlin confirming that Moscow is not going to breach any of the agreements, international ones, which are related to North Korea, and saying that it is nonsense when anyone is talking about the placement of the North Korean soldiers somewhere close to the area of the so-called special military operation. So Moscow does insist that it knows the perils and the risks if Russia breaches those international sanctions, and Moscow is not going to do that. Interestingly, the Kremlin has confirmed that no documents have been signed as a result of this visit, neither in the military sphere nor in any other.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Detroit's big three car companies hit by strikes. We're in the United States as the country faces its biggest industrial action in decades.
This week on Razor, monitoring the ecology of the beneficial microbes found in our cities.
Microbes have been on this planet for billions of years, and we've only been here for a few 100,000. The entire planet runs on microbes. Every ecosystem starts and ends with microbes. Every food chain, the oxygen production in our atmosphere is mainly microbial.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Claims that proper warnings could have prevented many deaths in Libya's devastating floods as the number of people killed passes 11,000. As hopes fade of finding survivors from the earthquake in Morocco, some remote communities are still waiting for help. And strengthening relations. DPRK leader Kim Jong-un tours Russia's largest aircraft factory on the 4th day of his visit. More than 12,000 workers employed by the 3 biggest US automakers have begun strike action. The walkout of members of the United Auto Workers Union will halt production at Ford, General Motors and the Stellantis plants in Detroit. It comes after they failed to reach a deal over a new contract. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. So, John, this is a history being made, isn't it?
Yep. No, it really is, because for the very first time, the very powerful United Auto Workers of America are targeting all 3 of the big 3. Now, the big 3 are Ford, GM and Stellantis, based in Detroit. Now, there's a big car industry in America in the South, down in Georgia and Texas and Mississippi and places like that. But these are overseas car manufacturers. They have different, some of them are actually not even unionized, but they have different contracts. What we're talking about is the hardscrabble Midwest, based around Detroit. And at midnight last night, they came out on strike. That was about 04 GMT. As you say, around 12,000 workers, maybe a little bit more than that, are now striking in a targeted way at factories in Missouri and Ohio and in Wayne, in Michigan. They're targeting the manufacturing of SUVs, sports utility vehicles, and pickup trucks, which are those things with a cabin and then a flatbed at the back. And those are in short supply, which is why the union has gone after those plants. The union wants a 40% pay rise over 4 years and a 35-hour working week and safeguards for their jobs. Now, the management are a very, very long way away from that. Mary Barra, who heads GM, one of the very few women to head up a Fortune 500 company, and who steered GM through the last strike in 2019, offered a last-minute 20% pay deal, which has been rejected. So they are very far apart. The problem is this is likely to spread. Okay, the longer it goes on. The Ford Motor Company in Detroit is saying it's going to hurt the pockets of the strikers, the communities where they live, the Ford bottom line, and the economy of America. Because if this does go on, then it's not just the people that bolt the cars together in Detroit. It's the people that bend the metal, that provide the leather and the cloth for the seats and the plastic for the buttons. And those factories are dotted all over America. And the stuff comes into the Detroit factories more or less at the last minute when they need it. So a lot of people could be facing a very difficult time as we approach the Christmas holidays here in the next 3 months. Finally, very awkward for President Biden. He says he's the most pro-union president ever. And now he's facing a national car strike on the eve, basically, of the 2024 presidential election. I checked just now, all 3 car maker shares are in the green, but the Dow is down 78 points. Robin.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York. China says major economic indicators from August suggest the country's economy is recovering. Retail sales grew 4.6% year-on-year in August, while annual industrial production rose 4.5%, up from July's 3.7% increase. However, the property sector continues to weigh on growth. New home prices in major cities rose between 0.3% and 0.6% year-on-year, while smaller cities saw a drop of 1.4%. Extreme weather events are being felt across the world as global warming intensifies. The Executive Director of the UN's Environment Programme, Inga Anderson, has been speaking exclusively to CGTN about China's efforts to tackle climate change.
China has this policy called redlining, where they identify where we can do what. And what are we going to protect, and what is going to be agriculture, etc. This is a very interesting and very remarkable policy. But China is also, especially in the north, moved in on this massive land restoration program, restoring millions and millions of hectares. In fact, the Sanshui restoration we recognized under the UN Decade of Restoration as one of the 10 flagships of remarkable nature. This is not just new. I mean, when I was younger, it's in the 90s, we were working in the lowest plateau also on this incredible restoration. So that kind of work is very, very remarkable and noteworthy. Right now, under, again, the president's leadership, there is an expansion of the national parks and protected areas in this country, which is, again, very remarkable.
That was Inga Anderson, Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme. And you can watch the whole interview on Saturday on Leaders Talk at 11:30 GMT. Former Spanish Football Federation President Luis Rubiales has been banned from going within 200 metres of footballer Jenni Hermoso. It's after Rubiales appeared before a judge in Spain's National Court. It follows a complaint of sexual assault related to kissing Hermoso during the medal ceremony at last month's World Cup final. Rubiales, who stepped down from his role on Sunday, maintains that the kiss was mutual and consensual. Well, our correspondent Siobhan McCall is following the story. So, Siobhan, what happened in court today?
Well, Robin, the prosecutor requested a restraining order that would ban Rubiales from going from within 500 metres of Jenni Hermoso, the player that he kissed in the World Cup final, and also he would not be allowed to contact her. Well, the judge brought in that restraining order, but he done it that it was 200 metres. The prosecutor also requested that Rubiales would have to appear in court every 15 days to make sure he didn't leave the country ahead of a potential criminal trial. The judge rejected that. The hearing, it was a preliminary hearing. It lasted around 45 minutes. Members of the public were not allowed to be in there and view. Rubiales, he denied the criminal offences of sexual assault relating to the kiss and coercion, which related to allegations from Jenni Hermoso and her family that they were intimidated into justifying his behaviour. So now what happens? Well, the judge has to go away and decide, will this go to a criminal trial? So he'll review the testimony today, he'll review the evidence. He's requested, for example, that media outlets send in all the footage they have of the kiss, and he'll make a decision on what to do next. But we believe it could take several months before that decision is made.
So that's the legal side of things. Let's talk about football, because Spanish players had made themselves unavailable to play after this incident, hadn't they? Will that now go back to normal?
Well, that's what many people thought would happen when Rubiales stepped down and the former coach Jorge Vilda left his job. Doesn't seem that is going to happen. The new coach, Montse Tomé, is due to announce her first squad for the Nations League games imminently. But the Spain players, all 23 of the World Cup winning team, declared last night they will not be making themselves available for selection. So they believe that the structural changes needed have not come in yet. They've said that, there's certain members, they haven't named the members of the team that they still see associated with Rubiales, and they say until that changes, until it's a brand new structure, they will not be making themselves available for selection. So when she names the team, she can still call them up, but they're not going to answer that.
Siobhan, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Siobhan McCall. And finally, a massive hunt for runaway crocodiles in China. A southern Chinese city has launched an operation to find 70 crocodiles that escaped from a farm when floods hit the region. More than half the reptiles have been recaptured, but the search continues for those still at large. Villagers have been warned to stay indoors, but so far no injuries have been reported. Our headlines again. Claims that proper warnings could have prevented many deaths in Libya's devastating floods, as the number of people killed passes 11,000. As hopes fade of finding survivors from the earthquake in Morocco, some remote communities are still waiting for help. And strengthening relations. DPRK leader Kim Jong-un tours Russia's largest aircraft factory on the fourth day of his visit. That is The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.